Welcome to Pen and Ink and a Webcam. It's not as good as being able to meet face to face and see one another, but I hope you've been finding ways to make contact this week. I hope you've been getting a chance to talk to um, other members of our congregation, um, that you are calling and texting and making those contacts and having that fellowship, even as we are going into a second week of not being able to meet. And we really don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know uh, how many weeks that we will not be meeting at the building, but we know for sure that uh, we are still family. We are still the church, and there are ways of having fellowship. As I introduced uh, in our last video, we're starting on a series looking at seniors in the Bible, looking at some good examples of the way that God's people have continued to serve, to care for others, to show their love for God and their love for God's people. I should share, I want to share that this is very difficult right now, um, because this series was actually the idea of Betty Schaefer. Uh, as we were going on in our Tuesday morning study, I asked if anybody had an idea of what we might look at next. And Betty asked me if there's any information or any studies out there about Christian seniors and about living faithfully as seniors. And if you know Betty, that shouldn't surprise you. She um, was never one to stay put, or to stop learning, or to stop trying uh, to serve more, to serve better. Um, she was very, very special woman. And with the news of her passing yesterday, this study has become all that more special to me. Like I said, it was her idea. And when we didn't find the materials that we had hoped to, uh, and I told her what was out there, and that I wasn't sure that we were going to find a book, she said, let's do our own thing. And we made a list and we started working through this. And so this is very much dedicated to Betty and to um, all the ways that she has touched all of our lives. So, as I said in the last video, we are going to look at Caleb. I want to ask you a question. Give some thought. Who do you know that follows God wholeheartedly? Maybe some names come to mind. I hope some names come to mind. Maybe someone who taught you when you were growing in faith. Maybe someone who showed you the way by their guidance or by their example. Maybe somebody you know today. Someone who puts their trust in God no matter what life throws at them. But if you're reading your Bible and a verse says that someone follows God wholeheartedly, you are almost definitely reading about Caleb. Some figures in the Bible pick up descriptions along the way that stick with us when we describe them. Abraham was God's friend. David was a man after God's own heart. John was the disciple that Jesus loved. Caleb followed God wholeheartedly. See, Caleb doesn't show up in too many places in the Bible. We don't follow his life as closely as we do someone like his friend Joshua. But when Caleb appears, so does this description. Other than one reference, the final reference that we see in Caleb's life in Judges chapter 1, every time that we see Caleb, that chapter describes him as someone who follows God wholeheartedly. And not only that, he is the only person that is described that way in the Bible. Um, Only two slight exceptions. One time, uh, Caleb and Joshua together are described as following God wholeheartedly, uh, in a similar way that Caleb himself is credited that way. And there's one reference um, to Solomon where it says he did not follow God wholeheartedly, and it throws in the phrase like his father David did. So there's um, fleeting references to Joshua and to David, but when it comes to Caleb, this seems to be uh, a description that was tied very, very closely to him and to the things he did. And if you know the things he did, that's not a surprise. Um, if you know one thing about Caleb, you probably know about when he was a slightly younger man, and Moses sent 12 spies into the land right before they were going to go into the promised land. And you probably know that when they got into the land and they were told to see what's there and to check it out and see the inhabitants and see what's growing there and bring back samples and bring back some evidence of what God has brought us to. And when they got there, they saw there were people who lived there that they thought they would have a hard time getting rid of. They saw people that they described them as giants, and they said we looked like grasshoppers in their eyes. But they also saw all the blessings that God had talked about. They saw the land flowing with milk and honey. They saw all the things that grew there. They saw all of the things that God wanted for them. And while 10 of them could only focus on the dangers, Caleb, along with Joshua, saw what God wanted them to see. And they knew the dangers didn't matter as long as God was with them. And while this is not in the book of Numbers, there's a Jewish tradition that says that large cluster of grapes that they brought back, you've maybe seen it on flannel graphs or PowerPoint presentations. That large cluster of grapes that they brought back because Moses said to bring back some of the vegetation. The 10 didn't want to bring it. They said that if we bring that back, it will encourage people to want to go in, and we don't want that. We are afraid. And the Jewish tradition says that the reason they brought it back is because Caleb drew his sword and said, we are going to bring it back. And if you continue to fight me, I will fight you. And so when they return, as you know the story goes, the 10 told about all of the dangers. They told about how afraid they were and how afraid everybody else should be. And Joshua and Caleb said, that doesn't matter. Caleb stood up and said, we have God on our side, and that's enough. Caleb followed God wholeheartedly. Joshua was strong and courageous. Caleb followed God wholeheartedly. And because of that, even though he wasn't able to convince everyone, he was blessed. Ultimately, God took the stance to all of those people. He said, if you don't want to go into the land, I will not make you go into the land. I will not make you be blessed. I want to bless you. I have made you for blessings. I have brought you here for blessings, but I will not make you be blessed. And so he said, all of those people who said they didn't want to go in will not. He said an entire generation would wait. And for 40 years, God's people waited to go into the land until all of those people died. And the book of Numbers tells us that only 2 people came out of Egypt and went into the land. Joshua and Caleb. And so when they come into the land, there is something special about Caleb and about Joshua. God said, all of the people of this generation who are younger than 20 will die before they come into the land, except Caleb. Because Caleb has a different spirit. And Caleb, because of his different spirit, follows God wholeheartedly. Now later, he repeats that at the end of the year. Excuse me, at the end of the period of time between Numbers 14 and Numbers 32. And at that point, it says that everyone older than 20, other than Caleb and Joshua, will die before going into the land. I think I may have said younger earlier. Hopefully you stayed with me. And including Joshua in the second one, but not the first, might give us some clues about Joshua's age at the time, but that's for another video. But we see Caleb, because of this different spirit, because of this nature about him to follow God wholeheartedly, he received the blessing that God wanted to give to the whole nation. And then we don't see Caleb for 45 years. Caleb was 40 at the time that the spies went in. And 45 years later, he shows up again. See, we'd been following Joshua. We knew about Joshua before the spies. He was the young man at Moses' side. He stood at the tent when Moses talked with God, and we continue to see Joshua. He crosses the Jordan, and Joshua leads the troops at Jericho and Ai and all of these major battles. And we know about Joshua. Caleb is missing for a while, at least from the text. Caleb's living his life. Caleb is taking care of his family. Caleb is most certainly helping in these battles. I don't know if he's a leader. I don't know if he was a soldier. I don't know if he was wise counsel. But Caleb shows up again 45 years after we saw him the first time. Caleb shows up, and this is found in Joshua chapter 14. After the conquest of the land, and they've taken over the cities, and they're starting to divide it up, and they're starting to say, this tribe takes this land, and this shall be the border of this territory, and all of that really boring stuff that we forget is in the book of Joshua, because it has all this exciting stuff for a few chapters and a really great chapter 24 at the end, and we forget about the gerrymandering and dividing of the land in the rest of the book. But as they're doing that, Caleb shows up, and he said, Moses made me a promise. At the time that Caleb stood up and followed God wholeheartedly, Moses made him a promise that he could have the land that they spied out. The land of the Anakites, the land that had the giant cluster of grapes, the land that he stood up for and said, this is our land. Moses said, when we get in, it's going to be your land. And Caleb said, God has given me 45 years since then, and I'd like my land. I'd like the blessings that God laid out for me. And he didn't just go take it because he wanted it. He got permission from Joshua, who had taken over for Moses, who acted very much in a role of a prophet like Moses did, who got instruction from God. And because Caleb followed God wholeheartedly, then, as he did his whole life, he was given permission to take his family, to take his people, and capture that land. You might recognize the one of the translations of what Caleb had to say when he asked for land. He said, "Give me this mountain." It was a mountainous area, and he says, "I would like what has been promised to me." We think of Caleb as one of the young men who went in to spy the land. And he was that. And then his story continued. God gave him more years. God blessed him with years and with family and so many things before he got to the time where he asked for his home. And it seems a little strange to think about it, but if we take Numbers seriously with what it says, Caleb was at one point the oldest man in Israel. Because if he and Joshua were the only ones who came out of Egypt and went in to the promised land, they must have been the two oldest. And the book of Judges tells us that uh, Caleb, after the death of Joshua, seemed to be coming into some level of leadership. Maybe he wasn't the one giving the orders, but he started giving some instructions. He sought to find a husband for his daughter, and said that the one who was able to accomplish some great things for God would become his son-in-law. And that man, Othniel, became the first judge over Israel when they were in the land. And Caleb seemed to have been at work in this. And he would have been the oldest man in Israel. Caleb is an example of a man living a faithful life, and a long faithful life. We don't know about where he came from exactly, what brought him to the position of being chosen as a spy at the age of 40. We know it seems like he was a foreigner. He was identified as the son of a Perizzite, who was one of the foreign tribes at the time of Abraham, and yet he is chosen as the representative of the tribe of Judah. So we don't know what brought him into being accepted as an Israelite, even though he may not have been native to that. We don't know all of that, but what we do see is from the time that we meet Caleb, I've said it so many times, he followed God wholeheartedly. Caleb shows us a kind of leadership from those who may not be in a leadership position. Caleb led not because it was his job or because leadership was thrust upon him. We don't even see him stepping forward for a large portion of his life. We don't even know what he's doing for large portions. He's not in one of those glamorous leadership positions. But when he led, it was because it was the right thing to do. Because he remembered what was right at a time when that was being forgotten. And God's people need that. The church needs that. It's so easy to get caught up in the latest trend and the latest crisis and the most pressing need. And we have to have someone who follows God wholeheartedly, who remembers the bigger picture. That's what Caleb did. He stood up and said, you need to remember, our seniors represent a communal memory that can and does sustain us. Caleb stood up and said, you need to remember what happened 45 years ago. And he said that to Joshua and a bunch of people younger than 40. He said, you need to remember. They don't remember. Our seniors remember things that some of us can't. If one of our seniors asked me if I remember 45 years ago, I'd say, I'm 35. I can't. There is a blessing to a community to have those who remember. For those who were there, for those who know what is right because they have experienced all of these things about what it looks like to get it right, what it looks like to get it wrong, what it looks like to miss out on blessings, and what it feels like to at long last receive blessings. So often we focus on the leadership positions in our churches. Who's in the pulpit? Who's making the decisions? Who's standing up front? I'll admit, I think about those things too. That's been my frame of reference in leadership for a while. I guess I shouldn't say a long time if I'm talking about somebody like Caleb. If I'm talking about long-term communal memory, I don't have it. But I know that is my context. I think in terms of sermons. I think in terms of meetings and decisions. But that's not where leadership comes from all the time in a church. We need leaders like Caleb, who are leaders because they are examples, because they have been doing it, because they have been standing up, because they remember, and because they know what God expects from us. We have those seniors in our congregation, and we are blessed to have them. The church needs seniors like Caleb. They need young people like Caleb too. And we should keep looking at that story, and we should teach about that story too. But the church needs seniors who are going to stand up and say, I remember. We need seniors who stand up and say, I still follow. I still will follow wholeheartedly. So give me that mountain. Give me that blessing. Listen to me. Give me the time. I hope that our seniors are inspired by the example of Caleb. And I hope that those of us who are not there yet can learn how important it is to listen. Seniors, we need your stories. Not just the experience, not just the moral of the story. We need to hear about what you've seen. I can't do it. I can't tell the stories that you can tell. And that's okay. Our job as we fellowship and as we try to be the church and as we try to be the most that we can be and be the best that we can be is not to look to one person. Even Moses didn't want that. He was maybe the most capable of doing that. We need some Calebs. We need some stories. We need our people who follow God wholeheartedly to stand alongside us and say, let's get our blessings because God is with us. Caleb's pretty incredible. God can do incredible things with our incredible people. And I really pray that this series isn't just me talking at you through a webcam. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear who inspires you. And the nice thing about this being on YouTube, there's a comment section. And I've joked at times that never read the comments of a YouTube video because someone's going to have nastiness to say. Well, I feel confident that we can keep that from happening. So continue this conversation. Let us know who you see who is a Caleb today, or somebody who is a Caleb in your life when you were younger or today. Who do we have that can act in this way among our seniors? Because we've got to have them. We have to. So that's all for this video. We will look at Joshua next. His story, of course, overlaps with Caleb's, but he has a little different perspective on his role. So let me know your thoughts. And as always, in the words of 3 John, I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you.